Hi, and welcome to IBA's irregular series of Talking Propeller Heads. IBA as a company is privileged to have a global client base from startups, scale-ups to NASDAQ-listed companies that are always on the cutting edge of change. As a result, we're lucky enough to have access to subject matter experts that are the movers and shakers out there in tech and business. And our job is to get those messages out to opinion-leading journalists in top media. So when Mark Zuckerberg suddenly announced a month ago that Threads and Instagram were joining something called the Fediverse, what, I hear you say, is a Fediverse, and that you could now share your thread posts on something called Mastodon, Master what? Well, we at IBA weren't in the so what zone at all. We were in the core Mike Karliner zone, and here he is. Welcome, Mike.
Hi.
And I remember about a year and a half ago, I was having a drink with you, friend, colleague, inventor, first CTO of the world's famous curated music app Shazam. And by the way, open source is his middle name. And we were discussing the foghorn of social media when suddenly you chirped up and said, "What about the Fediverse?" So, Mike, a year and a half on from that meeting, what about the Fediverse? Mark is no fool, so this move is going to have repercussions, I get the feeling. Is this the start of a seismic social media shakeout? And what are the implications for business? I'm sure you've got something to say on this, Mike.
First, I think we could start with a quick definition of what the Fediverse is. The quick technical one is simply that it's a group of social media platforms that can all interoperate together, like, follow, comment, etc. By analogy is possibly the easiest way to understand that in real terms. We have a worldwide phone network, mobile phone network. We have phone numbers. All the phone numbers work together no matter which company you're on. And I can phone somebody on a different phone company, and I don't even think about it. I don't know where Judith buys her SIM cards from. And similarly, if I wanted to move my number, I can start up another contract with a different company, and nobody really is aware that I've done that. And that interoperability is the thing that we don't have in current social media. I'm stuck on Facebook with my followers, similarly on Twitter, which is the thing that basically is keeping it alive. So the other thing you could do, for example, is also look at, say, email, where there's millions, lots and lots of email providers. There's a few big gorillas like Microsoft and Google, but by and large, all email systems work together. The thing that we don't have with social media as it stands is the ability, for example, for a Facebook user from his Facebook account to like something on TikTok. So this is a slightly unnatural way of looking at things. It just sort of happened by accident because these things grew and grew as walled gardens. But most of the things that work in our real life actually act as decentralized systems, open systems where they can interoperate and people go backwards and forwards. So the Fediverse itself has got lots of different bits of software in it. The most common, most popular by quite a long margin is a thing called Mastodon, which is a kind of Twitter clone, Twitter-like thing. But there's thousands of Mastodon servers. So Mastodon, the software is one thing. Mastodon, the instances, there's thousands of instances. There's Mastodon.social, which is probably the biggest one with several 100,000, actually maybe 1 million even. There's Baze.social, which has got quirky people on it. Ironically, there's even Truth Social, which, believe it or not, is a Mastodon instance, but it just doesn't talk to anybody else, which kind of defeats the purpose of the thing, but got Donald Trump quickly on the air with a social media platform, which just shows you what it is about open source. There's lots of other pieces of software which are also part of the Fediverse. They all interoperate together, and they do things like YouTube equivalents, Instagram equivalents, Substack for paid newsletters, and so forth. But the nice thing is that they all work together and you can like and comment across all those boundaries. So that's what the thing is at the moment. Okay.
And so the Fediverse and Mastodon, how does that relate to Meta and Threads? Put them together so that we can see the implications of why they're working together.
So Threads, a few months ago, started announcing their intent to interoperate with the Fediverse. And that caused a certain amount of furor and a certain amount of puzzlement, in that even now, although Threads is still pretty much a small player, there are around about 150 million active users a month. The Fediverse, although it's had enormous growth since Musk started turning people off Twitter, is still in the few million MAU. So why would Meta, Mr. Zuckerberg, etc., even want to consider doing that? And I believe that it's quite a smart strategic move. The thing is that Meta is actively, as all the big social media are, we've seen the news about TikTok and everything else, these guys are seriously under fire, especially Meta, who've got the biggest number of users at all. Although there's 150 million in Threads, there's 2 billion Instagram monthly users. These are monopolistic levels of uh, occupancy of a sector, right? And they are under serious fire and investigation, especially by the EU, but also by the US and elsewhere. And we've seen this kind of thing happen before. Microsoft came under a lot of fire many years ago because they were monopolistic. They had a huge dominance and they had to adopt open systems. They suddenly had to get religion about Linux and the whole Unix environment, and they caved in on that. Apple is now engaged in a huge fight to try and stop the EU making it open up its systems, and is losing every battle, right? So what I believe that Threads is doing, and by implication the whole of Meta, is they're making the strategic move to say it's going to happen anyway. We're going to embrace it. We're obviously going to be the biggest thing around, so we're probably in pretty good shape, but it means that we're well protected against regulatory breakup by simply doing it first and going into an open system. And the interesting thing about this is that it's actually reasonably significant. What we've seen, for example, is Threads now allows Fediverse accounts to follow Threads accounts, which means I now follow Joe Biden on his Threads account in my Mastodon instance, which feels kind of grown up for what is kind of an open source sort of geeky kind of place. But there's what it also means is there's other platforms moving in. So we've got Ghost, which is a Substack alternative, going in. We've got one of the newsletter companies coming in. Tumblr are doing these kinds of things, and they're moving in because they're now part of a much bigger ecosystem, and it's starting to snowball. They've all got their niches, so they're reasonably protected because each of those have got their own followings and their own feature set. But they become part of a much larger environment. And of course, when Threads moves in, it means that, for example, Tumblr is now interoperating with Threads, and by implication, eventually maybe Instagram, which looks pretty attractive to me if I was doing a strategic move in any company.
So the floodgates have opened, it seems to me. Elon and X is just a distraction. Zuckerberg is actually digging deep. He's thrown down the gauntlet. He's gone open. But I see recently he's hunting B2B LinkedIn prospects. He's slashed his Meta ad rates. So he's on the warpath. So what are the implications for B2B companies and techie companies? What can they do? How can they take advantage of this change?
Well, I think the advertising, to a certain extent, is a bit of I wouldn't say a distraction. I mean, it's nice that he's dropped his ad rates and he's trying to eat some of the competition. But the thing is, if you're in a small to medium, even a medium-sized company, advertising is enormously expensive. All of us are snowed by advertising, right? And so lots of people put down ad blockers and various other ways, or just tune out to advertising. So if you're trying to get the message out as a small company, advertising is a pretty difficult hill to climb in that regard. Now, especially in B2B, where the messages are somewhat more complicated anyway, and you can't just have a sign by saying buy stock margarine. It doesn't work like that. Out in the Fediverse, it's pretty much an ad-free zone for the same reasons that you can't really have advertising on the phone network. It just doesn't accommodate it particularly. It's about content, and good content is king, right? In the Fediverse. Also, one of the characteristics of Fediverse, not pretty much intrinsic, is there are no, you curate your own feeds. There is no algorithm pushing your stuff. All the other social media, Threads included, have got feeds, and you just get stuff thrown at you. On the Fediverse, you make it up for yourself, which means, for example, I've got a heavily carefully curated feed, which is full of interesting people, word puzzles, and lots of tech feeds, right? So the thing is, although it's a relatively small space, what you've also got is somewhere that is full of tech professionals, senior professionals of all professions, legal and medical, all scientific, right? And you get a lot more engagement because people have chosen what they're seeing. They don't get, unsolicited stuff. What they're seeing is what they want to see. So that means that now it's about good writing, good content, and careful management of your followers. And the nice thing is that if, for example, microblogging is not the best way to get your message out as a company, then there's sort of Friendica, for example, which is for longer form stuff. There is stuff that's the equivalent of Substack, and there's the stuff that will do newsletter management, but they all interoperate. So what you got is quite a good place to start building a much more civilized and also sort of professionally business oriented following. And the nice thing also is that because it's all open source software and you're not tied into some billionaire's whims, it's pretty low cost and it's cheap. You can do it via various ways. I've got my own instance on Mastodon. It's $20 a month. That would do, 50 users or something, right? But the thing is that you can start at very small numbers or just opening an account with somebody else's server, but you have total management of your own server, which means you can have a gated community if you so desire. So there's a lot of good strategic reasons for now moving into the Fediverse, starting to do that. The Threads thing is very significant because it opens it up to the wider community, hopefully without giving us all the negative consequences of big social media.
So what you're saying is there are some real opportunities for B2B early adopters, at least at this point in time, on that well-known bell curve. The opportunities are there, from what you're saying, I see, to open up persuasive discussion groups around their brand equity, to build brand evangelists around their own equity that they've got, that is not. It's not selly. They're not. They're people that will engage with them are people who are interested and keen to understand what they actually are selling and what the value of those solutions are. So we'll be watching this space, Mike, with you just to see how it does grow. Thank you, Mike. Compelling conversation as ever. And everyone else, stay tuned and watch out for our next Talking Propeller Heads. Thanks. Bye-bye.